The Dwarves, Part 1. Prologue. Glandolin dispatched a lingering assailant and sank to the stone floor, fumbling for his drinking pouch. He tore off his helmet and poured water over his sweat-drenched hair. The cool fluid trickled over his skin, revitalizing his will. How many of us remain? He stumbled to his feet and went in search of survivors. Of the 100-strong army, 70 were left. Among them, the formidable figure of the Fifthling monarch. Nowhere were the enemy corpses stacked higher than at Giselbert Iron Eye's feet. His shiny armor, made of the toughest steel forged in a dwarven smithy, gleamed brightly, and his diamond-studded belt caught the flames that licked from pools of burning oil. He climbed atop a stone ledge to speak to his folk. "Stand firm!" Steady and true, his voice sounded across the battlements. "Be as unyielding as the rock from which we were hewn. Nothing, no orc, no ogre, no creature of Tion will break us. We will cut them to pieces as dwarves have done for millennia. Vrockus is with us!" The speech was met with low cheers and grunts of approval. The dwarves had been dealt a blow, but already their confidence was returning. They had grit and pride enough to stop the enemy in its tracks. The warriors replenished their weary bodies with food and dark ale. With every sip and mouthful, they felt stronger and more alive. The worst injuries were treated as time and circumstance permitted, gaping wounds sewn hurriedly together with fine twine. Glandolin found himself a space on the floor beside Glandolin's strongarm. The two friends ate in silence, watching the mass of orcs that had retreated 100 paces from the gates. To Glandolin's eyes, it seemed the enemy had formed a living battering ram, intent on smashing down the gateway with their flesh. "Such persistence," he said softly. "I've never seen them so dogged as they were tonight. Something has changed." The thought of the dying trees sent a chill down his spine. All of a sudden, an axe clattered to the floor beside him. Turning just in time, he saw his companion slump forward. "Glandolin!" He caught hold of the dwarf and was dismayed to see delicate beads of sweat glistening on his forehead, drenching his face and beard. His reddened eyes were glazed and unseeing. Glandolin knew at once that the mystery illness had claimed another victim, finishing what the enemy had left half done. "Get some rest. The fever will soon be over." Hauling Glandolin's heaving body to one side, he settled him as comfortably as he could, knowing full well that the illness was probably fatal. The long wait sapped the strength of the dwarves and orcs alike. Fatigue, the warrior's enemy, set in. Glandolin dozed on his feet until his helmet hit the parapet with a thud. Awaking with a start, he looked around anxiously. Yet more of his kinsmen had fallen prey to the sickness. Fortune had turned her back upon the children of the smith. A bugle call rent the air, setting his heart racing. In the cold light of the moon, he watched the approaching rows of the colossal silhouettes, 4 times as tall as the orcs. There were 40 of them. Their hideous bodies were clad in poorly wrought armor, and their monstrous hands clasped fir saplings roughly fashioned into clubs. Ogres. The dwarves' defenses would crumble if the giants were to scale the walls. The cauldrons of molten slag were empty, the cache of stones depleted. For a moment, Glandolin's doubts returned, but a glance at Giselbert's gleaming figure assured him that evil would be defeated in the time-honored way. The mass of orcs stirred and a cheer went up as the ogres approached. Marching to the head of the army, the enormous beasts, uglier and more oafish than even the orcs, deposited their grappling irons, the 4 prongs of which were the length of a fully grown man. They attached long chains to the stem of each hook. "The apparatus is ill-suited to climbing," thought Glandolin. "The beasts intend to topple the walls." Whistling through the air, 3 dozen claws buried themselves into the stonework. A shouted order summoned the watching orcs to join the ogres in their tug-of-war. A crack of whips sounded, and the jangling links pulled taut. Glendolyn heard the wall groan softly. The stronghold, built many cycles ago by his kinsmen, was no match for the beast's raw power. "Quick! Bring the wounded to safety!" he bellowed. The party of dwarves responsible for tending the cauldrons left their stations and carried off Glendolyn and the other ailing warriors. Masonry crumbled as a section of the crenellated battlement ripped from the wall. The grappling hook went into freefall amid the showering stonework, killing 2 ogres and 10 orcs. The enemy forces held their ground. Soon, the hook was ripping through the air again, poised to sink its claws into the wall. This time, the dwarves retreated, abandoning the parapet just in time. They took up position in the barbican above the gates. Glendolyn listened as a large section of wall crashed and shattered on the ground below. The earth quaked, and the invading army howled in triumph. Good luck to them, thought Glendolyn, endeavoring to stay calm. I hope they dash their brains out on the doors. The gateway was built to withstand more than a few paltry grappling irons. He peered cautiously over the steel-plated wall. More reinforcements were on their way. Horsemen mounted on jet-black steeds galloped to the head of the army of ogres and orcs. Glendolyn instantly recognized the pointed ears of the tall, slim creatures. A red glow shone from the horses' eyes, and their hooves struck the ground in a shower of white sparks. 2 riders thundered to the gateway and gave orders to the troops. The orcs and ogres set about clearing the pathway of fallen masonry so the assault could start afresh. Wheeling round on their horses, the riders found safe quarter from which to watch. One of the 2 creatures unshouldered a mighty bow and knocked an arrow against the woven bowstring. The marksman's gloved fingers held the weapon loosely as he bided his time. Hastily, the fithlings pushed boulders over the parapet and onto the beasts below. The enemy flinched, jostling to evade the projectiles, and 3 of the orcs turned to flee. The archer raised his bow. Before the deserters could take flight, the first arrow, too fast for Glendolyn to follow, sang through the air and an orc fell to its knees. Already a second missile, uncommonly long for an arrow, sped from the archer's bow. The second beast perished, shrieking, followed a moment later by the third. The remaining minions took heed of the warning and resumed their work on the pathway. The orcs did not venture a protest at the murder of their kinsmen. By the coming of dawn, the path had been cleared. The fithlings marveled at the scene unfolding before their eyes. The sky had brightened in the east, heralding the rising of the sun. Yet a thick bank of fog loomed in the north. Its luminous center, a maelstrom of black, red, and silver, flickered with coursing light. In defiance of the wind, it rolled toward the gateway, sweeping over the beasts below. The ruckus orcs fell silent, huddling nervously together and shrinking away from the fog. Stooping, the ogres allowed it to pass, as if hailing their leader. The riders bowed their heads and saluted the vaporous mass. The shimmering mist lowered itself gently to the ground and hovered in front of the horses. Then the unthinkable happened. With a shudder, the first of 5 bolts on the doors shot from its cylinder. The gateway quaked. Someone had spoken the incantation, delivering Gildegard into the clutches of the invading hordes. "No!" bellowed Glendolyn, turning his back to the enemy and leaning over the inner wall to seek the culprit below. "No dwarf would ever!" Glendolyn strongarm. Alone, the dwarf was standing by the doors, lips moving, hands raised in supplication. "Silence!" Glendolyn bellowed. "Can't you see what you're doing?" His shouts fell on deaf ears. The second lock glowed brightly, illuminated by the runes. The bolt creaked back. "He's been bewitched," muttered Glendolyn. The fog has infected his mind. The third bolt left its ferrule and shot free. At last, the custodians of the gateway stirred, springing to their feet. They darted down the staircase, racing to put a stop to the treacherous magic before it was too late. The fourth bolt drew back. With one bolt remaining, Glamdolin was still standing unchallenged on the pathway. Time is against us, Glamdolin thought grimly. Forgive me, Vrockus, but I have no choice. He gripped his axe and hurled it with all his might and fury at his comrade in arms.
If you're enjoying this story, please remember to click the like button and subscribe. Also, follow me on Patreon for early access, and if you want extra rewards, join my Patreon Fae Fam. Thanks for listening.